Surrogacy is when a surrogate carries a baby. This can be done two ways: traditional surrogacy or gestational surrogacy. Gestational surrogacy, which oftentimes, and you'll probably hear throughout this conversation, just referred to as surrogacy because it's the most
Yes.
common one. That is when a surrogate carries a baby with no genetic tie. So this will look like the intended parent's egg or donor egg, and then the intended parent's sperm or donor sperm. And so this baby or embryo has no genetic link to the surrogate. There's traditional surrogacy, which is much less common and rare. That is when she does have a genetic link. So it is her egg and either the intended parent or donor sperm.
Why do you think surrogacy triggers so much judgment when it becomes public? And how does that stigma affect everyday families considering this path?
I think it makes families that are considering it really intimidated. I've been on a lot of consultations where people ask me, how did you talk to your family about it? Or how did your community accept you? And to me, I've been in a community where they were so happy for me to have a child. So it was really an interesting and eye-opening experience that not everybody feels that way.
Welcome back to the show. It's Dr. Mona, and if you're tuning in, you're watching this on our YouTube channel. And a reminder, if you like watching our podcast in visual form, it's so important to hit that thumbs up sign, share these videos so we can continue to bring these amazing conversations on our channel. And the point of Peds Doc Talk and the Peds Doc Talk podcast is not only to parent amazing, resilient, awesome kids, but it's also to help the parents in their own journey, whether they birthed their own child, whether they used IVF, or whether they used a surrogate. And I wanted to have today's guest on to talk about surrogacy, to talk about a lot of the misconceptions around it, and how to navigate this very emotional process without stigma. So today's guest is Jessie Jaskulsky, who's the founder of Surrogacy Simplified, a consulting firm dedicated to helping intended parents navigate the emotional, logistical, and often overwhelming surrogacy journey, which I have seen through my friends who've gone through it. As a former intended parent herself, Jessie blends personal experience with deep industry expertise to provide step-by-step guidance, case management, trusted referrals, and steady support throughout the entire surrogacy process for both independent and agency surrogacy journeys. So she leads a free online intended parent community, which, by the way, I love that terminology, where you can ask the questions you're really thinking, feel less alone, which we all need, and connect with others building their families through surrogacy. Jessie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Dr. Mona. Thanks for having me.
Well, we connected a while back. You had emailed me through a mutual friend, and I was like, this sounds amazing. And I think you had known that I'd done my own IVF journey. I did not have to use a surrogate, but I know so many of my closest friends who've had to go the surrogacy route. And I have seen all the things that you mentioned: the cost, the emotional, the logistical, the who do I find? How is it happening? I mean, there's just so much that goes into it. Tell me why you started Surrogacy Simplified and what you feel it's adding to this journey for so many parents.
Yes. I started Surrogacy Simplified after what felt like the most difficult journey to becoming a mom. I now have two daughters, Lily and Luna. And when I was going through the process, although now when I speak to so many intended parents, this is a common experience, I thought weird and rare things keep happening to me. And through this weird and rare and complicated, I had to take a step back, I had a pregnancy loss of my own, which led to secondary infertility, which I imagine many listeners who are experiencing infertility and have their kids might be experiencing. And that's what led me down the path of surrogacy. I went through two beautiful surrogacy journeys, one with an agency, one independently, and figured I had so much knowledge, and there's so many wonderful surrogates that are in the surrogacy space professionally. There's not as many intended parents who have lived on that side. And I really wanted to come back to this space meaningfully and help other people through the process.
What a journey. I mean, I can say from the IVF journey, I have had a traumatic birth. I've also had IVF, and I'm just comparing my own reality. I don't expect everyone to have the same reality.
Yes.
Birth trauma was very hard, but there was an end to it. What I mean by that is that I healed. My body was, back to getting normal, if you can call it normal. But with the IVF journey, that caused me a lot of depression. I was the saddest I've ever felt in a time when you think other people who are having having babies the other way of like, just normal conception, this and that, how simple it can feel for them. But for us, when we're trying to conceive a baby, all the stress, all of the logistics that go into it. And then you added the extra layer of a surrogate to it. I mean, I can't imagine from a personal standpoint, but I can only relate to the people who've been there. And I think what is really important for me in this conversation, because it is Surrogacy Awareness Month, to promote, again, surrogacy, reduce those misconceptions. I think the first thing we have to do is that it's often talked about or people hear about it, but it's rarely explained in plain language for just a basic person to understand who may not be going through the journey. So for someone brand new to this topic, can you walk us through what surrogacy means, what it actually is, and the difference between a gestational carrier and a surrogate?
Yes. So a surrogacy is when a surrogate carries a baby. This can be done two ways: traditional surrogacy or gestational surrogacy. Gestational surrogacy, which oftentimes, and you'll probably hear throughout this conversation, just referred to as surrogacy because it's the most
Yes.
common one. That is when a surrogate carries a baby with no genetic tie. So this will look like the intended parent's egg or donor egg, and then the intended parent's sperm or donor sperm. And so this baby has, or embryo, has no genetic link to the surrogate. There's traditional surrogacy, which is much, much less common and rare. That is when she does have a genetic link. So it is her egg and either the intended parent or donor sperm.
Mm. And so does it really have anything to do with the relationship between the person carrying the baby?
So
Like, yeah.
in traditional surrogacy, she has that genetic link. So yes,
The
but
she meaning the person carrying, right. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, exactly.
And
Okay.
and what's interesting is when I went through the process, it was very important to me that people use the term gestational carrier because
Right.
I didn't want them to think that I did not have a genetic tie to my daughters. But as surrogacies become a little more mainstream and talked about, it's sort of used now interchangeably, and even I feel differently about it. So I'll refer to my previous gestational carriers as my surrogates and use those terms interchangeably. Whereas when I first began this process nearly 7 years ago, I would only use the term gestational carrier.
Very interesting. No, I think I just learned something new. So that's awesome. I was like trying to clarify that. And so that is part of this whole process too, that again, explaining the terms. Why is it important for you, or is it really, that we know the terms and understand that nuance and differences?
The one term that I think is really important to share that really like makes the infertility community or women or families that are going through surrogacy feel bad is the term surrogate mother, which isn't quite what you asked, but I think it's
Mhm.
helpful to share
Yeah.
because it's very important to intended parents that it's known that this is not a mother relationship. She is simply growing the baby, growing in a safe vessel and like doing this beautiful, amazing thing, but she has no connection to the child biologically. She is just really helping grow and bring another child to life.
And there are a lot of assumptions about who surrogacy is for and why people choose it. And we've seen this in the media, and we'll get into more of that. But what are the most common misconceptions you hear surrounding that? And what do you wish more people would understand about the reason someone may go into this surrogacy journey? And you're okay me discussing it as surrogacy for the rest of this conversation?
Yes,
Yes. Okay,
absolutely.
perfect. Yeah.
There's so many things. I can share my personal experience
Hmm.
when I tell people that I've used, 2 surrogates or worked with 2 surrogates to have my daughters, they sort of give me this look like I'm this really wealthy woman, and
Mm.
it's like, "No, this is not." Many, many people of all different backgrounds are able to access surrogacy. There there's all different reasons that people come to surrogacy: secondary infertility, unexplained infertility. I meet with a lot of cancer survivors.
Yeah.
I meet with people, this is one that you might not even really realize, but severe mental health issues where they don't wanna go off of a medication, so to keep the baby safe during pregnancy. Same-sex couples, there's so many reasons, and these babies are so longed for and so wanted, and they are just so desired and prayed for.
And I think that's such an important thing, because we, as a person outside of that family relationship, right? So whether they're doing this alone, let's say a sperm donor or whatever they're doing, or this is something that they've wanted. It is none of my business to determine the why behind why they did it, right? Like, I
Exactly.
just want them to know that they have this option. And I think that's what's coming out from all of this sort of stigma, is that this reality, like, well, you have a lot of money, or you don't want to ruin your body, or people are making these assumptions, when in the end of the day, all that matters is that family wants to bring in their baby into this world and take care of it. I mean, that's all I care about. Like, if you're
Absolutely.
going to do it the old fashioned way, if you're going to do it via IVF, surrogacy, definitely just want you to bring that baby into the world and love that baby. And I wanted to kind of segue into those conversations around celebrities that have been open about their surrogacy journey. And to me, that is such a huge thing, to see someone in a public eye
Yes.
share that, because then it destigmatizes, hopefully, and gives ownership to the other people who may not have large platforms to say, yeah, I did that too. So some celebrities that come to mind that have been more vocal have been Meghan Trainor, Lily Collins, and Priyanka Chopra. They have shared that they've used a gestational carrier, and the responses have been harsh. And I'm pulling up some of the responses that happened for Lily Collins,
Yes.
and it's going to be hard to hear, because even though I haven't gone through the journey, but I want to be clear, if you are listening and you have gone through this surrogacy journey, it's going to feel hard. But the reason I want to share it, because I want people to hear, if they haven't been through the journey, how hurtful this can be. So these are just some of the things, right? Having babies shouldn't be like placing an order on Amazon. I loved Emily in Paris, but I'm not going to watch real life Lily and Handmaid's Tale. How do you separate a baby from his mother? I'm in shock. Adopt, don't shop. I mean, don't get me started on that one.
My
And
God.
then being so privileged you can even buy a child like you buy a house. Mm, as someone who's gone through this journey, as someone who has helped so many families in this journey, what are the first thoughts that come to mind when you hear those statements?
That people really don't understand the process and there's a lack of education.
Yeah. Mm. And it's that education around, like you said, what is the reasoning why people would do it, what exactly it is where that comes from?
Yes, and in the example of Lily Collins and Meghan Trainor, they don't owe us an explanation of
Exactly.
why they're pursuing surrogacy, and I can guarantee you it's not because of their career. I know I can speak for myself, I would have longed for those baby kicks and that growing bump and the cute bump outfits and all of the, even the nausea. It's really there's a reason that they are pursuing surrogacy, and it's not so they can maintain their careers or keep their bodies or because they have the means to do so financially. It's because that is the way that they're able to bring a child into the world.
W- I know we're trying to now get our minds into the mind of someone who may not understand. Why do you think surrogacy triggers so much judgment when it becomes public? And how does that stigma affect everyday families considering this path?
I think it makes families that are considering it really intimidated. I've been on a
Mhm.
lot of consultations where people ask me, "How did you talk to your family about it?" Or
Mm.
how did your community accept you?" And to me, I've been in a community where they were so happy for me to have a child. So it was really an interesting and eye-opening experience that not everybody feels that way. And I think a lot of it too is they don't realize it's for most of the surrogacy cases, the surrogate does not have any genetic link to the child, and
Mhm.
that it's the intended parent's baby.
Yeah, and what I see as a pediatrician, so as a reminder, I'm not navigating the journey of deciding to have a baby, surrogacy or not. I see these families in my office, and I don't see on my chart surrogacy baby, IVF baby, unless a family tells me, right? And so what I've noticed is that a lot of my families who've gone through for a large fertility journey, whether it's years, whether it's using a surrogate, the common feeling that I see from a pediatrician is that they feel a little more nervous. They feel a little more anxious, and maybe about the health of the baby. I don't know, in your experience, have you seen that as well when you support the families postpartum who've had their babies via surrogate?
Yes, I would say that the intended parents I work with have a whole range of emotions, like
Yeah.
tremendous relief, but something that I really do observe is a feeling of waiting for the other shoe to drop. They've had years and years of infertility and heartbreak, and even during the pregnancy, it can sometimes feel difficult to allow themselves to feel hopeful. And then once baby's here, there's this huge like feeling of elation, but then I do see with some of my intended parents still that trepidation and like, is this really happening after all
Yeah.
these years? And some of that anxiety.
And like you had said, I think we had chatted earlier, like you're waiting for that. They're kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop. Like
Exactly.
something must be happening here.
Right.
Oh, that's
It's
so
too
hard.
good
And
to be true.
and that's kind of why I love what you're doing, right? Because we tend to focus so much on the baby, like as pediatricians, and after the baby comes, it's all about baby, 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 but we forget how much support the intended parents need, how much support parents need in general, and these conversations are so important so that they know that they're not alone, right?
Right.
That if you're feeling that nerves, if you're feeling those little like, well, what if, that's actually a very common feeling given the time, money, heartache that you've went through. And thank you so much for normalizing that for our listeners who are like, yeah, that was me. Because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of listeners who are feeling that same way, whether they did surrogacy, IVF, however it turned out, you know?
Yeah, it's a lot, and there's like we said, there's just so much that goes into it and so much emotions and heartache and to leading up to that moment of joy that it's completely normal that it doesn't go away immediately once the baby's arrived.
Mm. And we're going to segue into something that I know is really hard for a lot of families is the cost. You know, cost is often one of the biggest barriers families worry about, and transparent information can be hard to find. What does the financial reality of surrogacy typically look like, and how can families begin planning if this is their journey without feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah. And there is a really huge range in surrogacy and what the cost can look like. And I'm an open book, so I'm going to share it all with you. So I tell intended parents a range of around $150,000, which I know sounds so high if you're hearing that number for the first time.
Yeah.
And it can sway on the higher end of that and go upwards way like up to closer to 200,000, or it can go
Hmm.
lower based on a variety of factors. Some of them are whether you're going to use an agency or go
Hmm.
independent. Some of them is a surrogate's compensation, so what that's going to look like for her. And then there's other things that go into this, whether or not she needs an additional health insurance policy, attorney fees, psychological fees, your IVF clinic fees, and escrow, and so forth. To afford surrogacy, a lot of people tap into their family. I see a lot of intended parents that have family support. Some of them will have employer sponsored benefits, like progeny, for example.
Hmm.
That is unfortunately very rare, but that is a possibility. So I would encourage everyone to look into that. There's also grants that people can apply for, and then there are loans as well.
And so through your work, you're basically also helping families navigate what may be the best option for them based on their finances, based on, what they're looking for.
Exactly. So when I'm working with an intended parent and they come to me for the first time and they ask me, "What do you think's better, going independently or using an agency?" And since I'm able to support them in both, I like to share the benefits and the drawbacks from each way. And one of the major advantages of going independent in comparison to an agency is being able to save on that money, but it's very important that if you go independent, you work with a consultant like myself. There's other many wonderful ones out there, or just that you're really, really researched and knowledgeable about all of the steps involved in the process.
I'm already loving this conversation about steps because some of our listeners may be in that process of like, where do I even begin? And this conversation can be that for them. And then also for my listeners who may not be going through this journey, what I think we're doing here is being able to provide some understanding. If your friend or loved one is going through this process, you can just say, hey, I listened to this episode. I'm getting a better idea of what you may be going through. Obviously, I would love to hear what support I can provide you. So thank you for doing that, right? Because this work, these conversations, it was so important for me to have you come on so that we can really normalize that this is a reality for so many families and not only support those going through it, but help inform the loved ones and the community who may not be going through it so that that stigma can be reduced.
Absolutely. And when you said that, the first thing that popped in my mind is something that friends will often say. And it's because they're trying to be hopeful and encouraging, and it's not from a place of any malintent.
Yeah.
Is you're so lucky you're not gonna your body's gonna stay the same, and
Ooh.
they mean it with
Yes.
yeah, and like to the woman who's hearing that comment, it's like, "No, I would love that. I would love to be swollen. I would love that growing bump." And, if you're out, I know for me, I was often told, "You're so lucky you can have a glass of wine at dinner," and,
Mm.
it's like, "No, I would love to not be able to have this glass of wine." Of course, it's tasty, but I would prefer to be not able to do this and be carrying a baby.
Ooh, I relate to that from my birth trauma where when I had a traumatic delivery and my son ended up having a stroke and seizures.
Oh my
That
god.
was very traumatic, right? Like, I mean, it was you have a newborn, they're in the NICU, EEG leads, all this stuff, MRIs, had a stroke. I mean, 1-day-old baby. Like, what's going to happen to my son, you know? And again, I don't think it was malintent, like you're saying. I think people are just trying to make you feel good or trying to
Exactly.
make you look like you're amazing. And the comment that I got, which related a lot, was, well, how lucky are you, or how lucky is he that he's in your family? And it's like, yeah, okay, awesome. I'm a great mom. I will be a great mom, but it doesn't take away the fact that this is a very hard thing, and that I just want people to acknowledge that none of us should be going through the struggle when other people don't have to. Right? Like that's kind of how I feel, is that especially as a pediatrician, when I see people easily get pregnant accidentally, whether they choose to keep the baby or not, right? I've had these situations when I was going through my own IVF journey of like teenage girls coming in and they were like, I want an abortion. I'm pro rights, but it also was like, oh, how I would love to be able to make a decision and have that baby. And it's that feeling of just like, oh my gosh, like I just want what everyone else seems to easily get. Like,
Yeah.
did you feel that sentiment a lot? Like maybe going through your own journey? Like, why is this so difficult for us? And why is this not happening for us when it seems so easy for everybody else?
Yeah, I did, and, when you as you were saying that, the memory that comes to mind is at my 30th birthday,
Mhm.
and we were at a brewery, and every all of my girlfriends were pregnant. I
Mm,
wanna say almost all of the girls there were pregnant but me, and it was just gut-wrenching, and
yeah.
that was after my loss, and while I was going through the trenches of figuring out what was going on with me, and if I could carry or if I did need to go to surrogacy, and that was probably the most difficult time of my life.
Yeah, and it's like I think for the listener who understanding from our perspective of like the IVF journey, the surrogacy journey, it doesn't take away the fact that we can't be happy for you, but it's a very split feeling of being happy but also grieving something you don't have. Right? That
Exactly. Yeah.
seems again, that seems so easy for somebody else. And I'm not saying like easy, obviously I know pregnancy is not easy for everyone, but like the conception process, right? Like the conceive, carry my baby, deliver it, have those picture perfect bump moments and all of that, that there's that when that expectation doesn't match reality, that grief comes, and that's what it can happen. And I think where I'd love to go next is that many people are curious about this journey but have no idea how the process even begins.
Yeah.
So if someone is just starting to explore this option, what are the first realistic steps they should take? And also include what you had mentioned to me earlier about the type of like whether you're going through an agency or whether you're finding that independently, like how that differs and how that works.
Yes. The first thing I would suggest is talking to your fertility clinic and at least getting from them their process, how they're going to approach it. And then they might even have a referral list for you because, as I was sharing before we started recording, there's at least 700 surrogacy agencies in the United States. So, trying to figure out which ones you can trust, which ones will have a good fit for you is really important. So, that can give you some place to start. And I also want to encourage you to research, but not go into a Google rabbit hole
Mm,
spiral. I
yeah.
think that there is a balance here. Tapping into your network to see if there's anyone that you might know that has a friend of a friend that's gone through surrogacy and you can talk to them firsthand for their experience is also incredibly valuable. I personally have a surrogacy ebook that I would love to share with anyone listening who might be considering surrogacy. It really breaks it down in a way that's digestible and hopefully can save you hours from the spiral.
Mm. That spiral, do you feel like that spiral can provide a lot more misinformation because it's not nuanced to the person? Or what does that spiral look like? And why do you think it can kind of cause more harm than good?
I think that's exactly what you said. There's just misinformation. It's so nuanced when especially, for example, when it comes to cost. Like, there's so
Mm,
many contingencies that can play into what your total cost can be, deciding what's the best route for you for surrogacy, what type of an agency to use, the attorneys, all of the different things, and you can get really caught up. So I think looking at it, as we said before, step by step and having a few people to trust, to talk to if you know someone that's gone through it, joining a support group. I have an intended parent community where anyone can join regardless of where they're at in the journey and really just begin to learn and meet other people that are going through the process.
and then any next steps after that would be,
I would say to start interviewing agencies or consultants if you're thinking you might go that path, just to
yeah.
sort of learn about their process, their fee structure, and how they'd be able to support you.
Mm. And then also utilize resources like from Jessie, obviously would be
Yes.
really awesome. We'll be attaching a lot of her resources and her services, and you, by the way, your agency works with nationwide in America.
Yes, we
Yes.
support intended parents all over the country on independent journeys and agency journeys.
Awesome. And again, you taught me something new. I didn't know that about the different types,
Yes,
even though I've had friends who've gone through the journey. One thing I've noticed, and it just depends on the personality, I think, of the person, on how vocal they'll be about their journey. And that can come from stigma, that can come from how comfortable they just feel sharing their personal life. Um, I had a lot of friends who went through surrogacy, and a lot meaning four really good friends, like
yes.
that I
I mean,
can
that
think
is
in
a
my
lot.
head. Yeah, that's a lot in my opinion. And it's interesting because they didn't divulge information to me like, "Hey, I'm going through I had to kind of ask where they were at, do what support can I give for them right now through this journey?" We know that this process is not just logistical, it is deeply emotional for intended parents and for gestational carriers. And I can imagine, you have this beautiful community, but what does the emotional journey look like? And did you find that even with the community, even for yourself, even if you knew people going through it, did you feel a sense of loneliness, even though you know other people going through the same process?
Yes, when I went through
Mm,
this process, I knew many women going through IVF, and our journey sort of paralleled in that way, but then when I pivoted to surrogacy, it was just me.
mm.
And one of the biggest emotions is this feeling of lack of control. You are giving total control up in the process and really placing your trust in somebody, most commonly that you do not know.
Which is the person carrying the baby.
Correct.
Right. Mm.
And, during the surrogacy journey, intended parents meet with a psychologist, and it's not an evaluation, it's like a psychoeducational consult. And they talk to the intended parents about the process, help them identify how they'll get through the ups and downs. And they really just talk about the ins and outs, everything under the sun about surrogacy. Something that's not as commonly done that I would recommend is continuing to check in with that psychologist periodically throughout the
Yeah.
surrogacy journey as like touch points. I think that's something that's incredibly valuable. And for me, I joke my emotional escape was Vanderpump Rules and all things Bravo.
I love it.
And yeah, it's like, as I always joke, it's do as I say, not as I do, but really joining a support group and meeting other people. So when you have these feelings and you see 10 other women or intended parents' hands come raise and say, me too, you feel so much less alone, and it's so comforting.
I can imagine that. And I love, the I don't know if we wanna call it trashy TV, but that's healing, man. Like, I you need sometimes you need passive drama that's not your own drama.
Yes.
Right? Like, you our lives are so full of so much emotion that sometimes it's I think from a psychological perspective, you're just like, "I just wanna watch the most drama-filled show
Yes,
that just makes me kinda chuckle, but it's not my drama because I have so much in my own life going on right now."
100%. I
I
know.
love it.
I wish I could say that I did those things during my own journey, but that was what led me to help create these for other people's. But yes, Bravo really helped me emotionally through my surrogacy journeys.
No, thank you for going through this emotional side because I think again when we think so much about protocols, right? Like, and I think about the IVF journey in itself. When I had the transfer, it's so protocolized and it's so like, okay, you're going to do this, and then you have to meet with this. But then you add the surrogacy layer, and you said beautifully about having to completely leave it out of your control and trust that person who is
Yeah,
carrying your baby. What
yeah.
would you say about that? Like, how can you cope with that? What are some strategies to kind of say, okay, I did what I could. This person is now taking care of the most important thing I'm creating in my life. How
Yeah.
would you advise those parents to kind of let it go, but also advocate, obviously, for the health of the baby? And are there legal things in place? I'm sure there are to ensure that the gestational carrier surrogate is doing all the right things to care for that baby.
Yes, there's so many things to say about this. First would really be being okay with giving up the control and letting
Yeah.
them know if you're having a hard time. I think that vulnerability really goes a long way. With my journeys, as I shared, I came to surrogacy following a pregnancy loss, and I knew that frequent communication would help me emotionally. It would make me feel, a little bit more at peace and just reassured. And I was very forthcoming with that. When you meet with a surrogate, you have what's called a match call.
Hmm.
And during that call, I said, "Hey, I lost my son at 22 weeks. The type of relationship I'm looking for is close and that we're keeping in touch." And my goal was that if that would feel annoying or not in line with the relationship they were wanting, we wouldn't match. And because I set sort of my hopes and dreams for the surrogacy journey at the onset, it really paved the way. I have two amazing women and families in our life now because of that, and that we just adore. We don't get to see them because they don't live close by, but we
Mm.
keep in touch.
And so do you feel like that's a common sentiment from your clients as well, and what you've heard is that there's a relationship that has maintained after, the birth of that child?
Yes, absolutely. I
Amazing.
think that naturally during the surrogacy journey, you're in a little bit more of frequent communication, and then it decreases just a little bit once baby is born because now you're caring for this child. But yes, they are always a very important part of your life.
Do you, through your experience, have you felt any of your clients, or do you think this is more of the exception or rule, felt concerned that they won't be able to bond with their baby because they couldn't carry their baby?
I've been asked that, and I usually share when I'm asked that my experience, and it's like this instant, indescribable connection
I know.
all the
I
time.
I love that we're talking about this because,
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I have a picture I might need to send to you later of the first moment my oldest was on my chest, and I'm just like, it's like this guttural cry because I couldn't believe after all of the years of heartache that she was finally here with us. And it was just incredible. And, most all the intended parents I talk to, as soon as they meet this baby, that's completely wiped away.
And that's why, earlier on in this conversation, we talked about some of those horrible comments that were given to Lily Collins and some
Yes.
celebrities. And I think those comments probably exist for obviously non-famous people too. They may not be verbalized because they're not public figures online, but
Right.
it was important for me to say those because exactly this conversation, right? That in order for us to be more compassionate, we have to understand that it's not our decision on what's happening there, and it's just really important that we, support the family and understand that there is bond. I think about it a lot as a pediatrician because there's a lot of misinformation out there on what dictates a perfect bond between a baby
Yeah.
and their mother, right? And this is one example, but you think about like whether you breast or formula fed,
Yep.
right? And I'm like, I know a lot of my surrogacy families, gestational carrier families, tend to lean towards formula unless they use breast milk from the birthing mother, correct?
Right. Yes.
Right, which is something that's real. And so there's so many decisions that can go into that, and that's such a personal discussion. But I, as a pediatrician, would also like to say, from a child development perspective, that there's not going to be an inability for you to bond. If you're feeling that, and if you're starting the journey, and you're like, well, will they understand me? They will. They will because of that nurturing relationship that you are going to provide. And I'm happy you said that because I want people to know that that's a reality. That the way we bond with our children is not how we delivered them. It's not whether we breast or formula fed them. It's not if we even delivered them at all. It's the relationship and connection and moments you have with them when that baby's in your arms.
Absolutely, and I've, talked to both of my daughters about surrogacy and how we
Mhm.
needed someone special to help grow them, and they know the whole thing and how loved they are, and I tell them every day what a miracle they are and how much we prayed for them, and I think they feel it and they understand that and, realize I think they're gonna be mind blown one day when they realize like, what is it, PE, how babies the other way babies are made because what they know
Yeah.
right now is the IVF and surrogacy journey. But yeah, I mean, the connection is just beyond. And as you can tell, I don't even have the words. It's just
I
an
I
instant.
feel that.
Yeah,
I feel it talking to you. I feel that. And it's so nice to reflect on your own personal journey. And of course, there's no one better to like, guide other people than someone who's lived in the trenches of it. And so I really, appreciate that. For families, carrying grief, fear, or outside opinions while considering surrogacy or in the journey, what do you want them to hear as they think about building their family this way?
I would encourage them to block out the noise. Understand that surrogacy is a long journey, but it is so beautiful and it connects you to this other family that is doing the most selfless thing for you and giving you the greatest gift in the world. And to really not give
Oh.
up, which I feel like sounds cheesy, but I mean it, like, because it's really, difficult and there's ups and there's downs, but it is just so worth it.
Oh, this is so beautiful. Is there anything else that you feel like we should be debunking or you feel like the world needs to understand? Because again, I'm just so grateful for this conversation about whether it's misconceptions or like people going through the journey that you're like, you know what? I wish when I started this, someone told me this information.
I think the process is long is helpful. I don't want to always paint an overly rosy picture because I truly think that's a disservice as well. I think that there's ups and there's downs and there's delays, but it's really such a beautiful journey. And I know some people don't love the word journey when we talk about IVF and surrogacy because it's such a long process, but really just to keep going and not to stop.
Jess, thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. I feel like our listeners are going to learn a lot. Just like I said, not only those navigating this journey, but for people who are outside of the journey, looking at their peers doing this to be able to better support them just by understanding the process. What is something that you're hopeful about in your life right now? What is something that's giving you a lot of joy?
Watching my daughters play together, they are really, really independent now, which feels weird because I have a 3 and a 6-year-old, and you're usually just so in the thick of it, and watching them have this tight little bond, we never imagined we'd have daughters close in age because of our infertility journey, so it's just such a blessing. So I would hands down say that, and then just the work that I do and being able to help people bring children and babies into this world is such a blessing that I don't take for granted.
I love ending the conversation with that sort of positivity and love. Thank you so much. Where can people go to stay connected, learn about all your resources, your services? And I know you said you had that ebook. Where can people go to get all that information?
I would definitely suggest following me on Instagram. I share a lot of resources there. It's Surrogacy Simplified. My website is also surrogacysimplified.com. And in there, you can find a way to have a free consultation, join our support group, and there's lots of really great resources as well.
Thank you so much. I will be linking all of that to our show notes. And I really just can't express how important this conversation was for me every month, but definitely during Surrogacy Awareness Month. So thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to share more on surrogacy and, help debunk myths and just spread the truth.
And for everyone joining us today, please make sure you hit that thumbs up sign, share this video. Like I said a few times, even if you're not in this journey, when you share this conversation, it will make someone going through this journey feel much less alone and reduce that stigma that exists to this day. And that's not what we want. We want people to understand that you can build families in very different ways, and surrogacy is part of that conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for learning with us, for destigmatizing things that need that. And I cannot wait to chat with another guest next time on the show.